Hey, hello, how do you do, everyone? Starry Z here. Deepwoken concept. That's what we're talking about today. Now, I've always wanted to make a concept for a Deepwoken, whether it's a mantra, an attunement, an oath, you know, just something. Just because, like, I like this game, and, you know, I tend to have a lot of ideas. In fact, I feel like everyone has some idea or thought that they're like, hey, you know, this could be pretty interesting for the game. You know, maybe they're thinking about, oh, hey, Blood Rend isn't out yet. It is now, but Blood Rend isn't out yet. I wonder if I could come up with concepts for it, see if it's like what comes out, or like, you know, something isn't confirmed, but you make ideas for it and it turns out, oh, hey, they liked my idea, so they added it to the game. I don't know, I'm just freaking rambling here, but either way, something I wanted to talk about was domains. Not going to talk about Vision Shaper because I feel like that's been talked to death. But anyways, for those who are new to the Deepwoken community, or, you know, don't watch like a whole lot of anime and are just confused on what the hell I'm talking about, domains refer to either the Vision Shaper mantra that used to be in the game called Illusionary Realm. Not going to worry about that. Instead, we're going to focus on the idea of domain expansions. So basically, this is something I'm pretty sure Punchy came up with, but basically the gist of it is, it was a combo of mantras, basically the equivalent of like all your mantras coming together to form one sort of super move, one sort of move that was sure to hit the opponent. You've probably seen it in Chime with Shadow, basically Rising Shadow, Shadow Vortex, you know, stuff like that. Combo mantras that are sure to hit you if you play into the opponent's trap. You know, it's just stuff like that. And the reason they're actually called domains is quite interesting. Or not really interesting, it's more of a just like a phrase grabbed from an anime. In Jujutsu Kaisen, basically every single user, magic person, ability user uses some form of cursed energy. Basically, all you need to know for this example is cursed energy is the equivalent of the song in Deepwoken. What we use for mantras, what we use for attunements. That's basically the gist of it. And domains were basically just the peak, the master of their abilities. Basically, their abilities coming together to create a domain where their ability becomes, well, mastered. It's built around their ability. For example, someone who could have transfiguration abilities, but their abilities only seem to work when they touch you. Well, in their domain, you're literally in the palm of their hands all the time, because their entire domain is themed around that transfiguration. Or what if someone is based around infinity, where they are hard to hit? Well, a mastery of that would instead be your opponent is given infinity. They're infinitely thinking things, they're infinitely feeling everything, thinking about everything. Doesn't matter, it's just infinite, making them unable to move. A complete mastery of their abilities. And that's the concept I want to focus on, alright? The concept of complete mastery over your abilities and creating a domain where your elements, your skills, all of that becomes peak. It's at its absolute peak. And I'm not talking about oaths. Now, hear me out, alright? Instead of adding like new mantras to the game that's just like, oh hey, here's a freaking mantra that opens a domain, sure, why not? Instead, we're going to focus on something else. For this concept, I want to give every single oath in the game the ability to open a domain. Giving it a whole new slot, aka a slot only this domain can exist in. You can only have one domain, right? Like, let's say you get to like 80 in your element, right? 80 in your element, 90, 100, whatever. Could be reworked, could be talked about, but the point is, you're at the complete mastery of your attunement. Like, you know, you're at like 80 Frost Draw, 80 Iron Sing, 80 Flame Charm. You can use 5-star mantras, right? Complete mastery of your attunement. You have access to at least most or majority of the talents, and at the very least, all of the mantras you have access to. You know, not counting like stuff that could require strength, like with fire. Like, besides the point, complete mastery over your attunement, and you get a skill card, a legendary talent that allows you, like, kind of like Will-O-Wisp, but instead of giving you a Wisp slot, it gives you a domain slot. And this is where your domain mantra will go. Basically, because of how strong I think these domains could be, right? I don't think they should even be allowed in wildcard slots. Like, they're in a completely different area of their own. Like, they can't be put in wildcard slots, they can't be put in support slots, Wisp slots, support slots, wisp slots, whatever. Not allowed in any of those. They're only allowed in this new domain mantra slot. And this domain mantra you get will be the absolute peak of your abilities. Basically, going to be high risk, high reward, as I said multiple times. Now, before we actually get into the concepts of each domain I thought of, I want to actually say how I went about making these, rules I made for myself, because I feel like domains should follow specific rules as to make them not too overpowered. Now, obviously, I'm not a game balancer and I don't play with some of these attunements, so I am not the best for creating concepts that are completely balanced, completely fair, whatever. Hell, I'm even willing to listen to you in the comments for what kind of domains you would make or change about the concepts I made. We're going to talk about each and every attunement, including blood rend, since, well, let's be real, it's blood rend, it just released. Saying I have an idea for a blood rend domain would be absolutely crazy, and would probably give me a bunch of views. Oh hey, look, my last blood rend video got a lot of views, who would have guessed? Either way, rules for all these domains, right? We're not talking about O's, we're only talking about attunements, the complete mastery of attunements. And I am willing to talk about oath concepts in the future, but for right now we're just focusing on the attunements so we can figure out balance and start a discussion over domain mantras. Because I do think domain mantras could be very interesting for the game and could change how you play the game and how Metamancer builds work, right? Because let's be real, Metamancer builds are annoying, but also just changing how Metamancer builds work and what the end goal of Metamancer build should be, what they could be, could also lead to some interesting balance changes that, well, encourage actually going Metamancer if you're having a high enough attunement stat. But, actually make it fun to play against instead of just someone zoning the entire time, because that's not really fair. Anyways, onto the actual rules I made for, well, creating these domains. The actual activation of the domain must have high risk, high reward. That's the number one rule I want to focus on. Because if you want to use the mastery of your abilities and force your person into a domain, it shouldn't just be doing a hand symbol and then pulling that person into a domain, because we are actually making a game here, or making concepts for a game. So it shouldn't just be, oop, I do a funny hand symbol and now all of a sudden you can't move or do anything. And secondly, the actual benefits, the actual reward you get for, well, popping your, well, domain. That meaning, basically, you shouldn't have a risk of oh, I take 5 damage for failing the cast, and then the reward being, the opponent instantly dies. Now, there shouldn't be any insta deaths here. Rather, the domain should have a gimmick, right? It's the absolute peak of your abilities, so it should have some gimmick related to the attunement. It's just that simple. It has a gimmick related to the attunement, and it benefits you from learning what that gimmick is and using your attunement to the best of your abilities. Now, obviously, when you get the mantra card, it should give you some brief description on what the domain does. But I'm not sure how to put that in a card, so instead we're just going to talk about the concepts here, yada yada. Anyways, rule number 2. This should keep in mind that the only way to cancel a domain expansion is either canceling it by hitting the opponent. This shouldn't work on every domain, but some domains should have some form of way of getting canceled by hitting your opponent. And number 2, being able to dodge out of the way, because the actual domain expansion ability should not be blocked, dodged, ghosted, or just evaded in some sort of way. So you can't escape it by going into Beast Burrow or Shade Step or submerging yourself into blood. This is the domain expansion. You are literally overpowering your opponent to create, freaking a domain. Now, before I say anything, I'm just gonna pop up a little visual on the screen. So basically, let's say the actual expansion of the domain, hitting your opponent looks like this, right? If your opponent is in this area, the domain will activate. However, if your opponent is able to dodge out of the area, well, congratulations, the domain doesn't activate and you suffer. However, if they actually dodge into the domain, basically this is similar to Chaser's Blood Waves, where you're going to get hit. Even if you try dodging, you're gonna get hit. You're gonna get hit and the domain is going to activate, right? Because this is, again, peak of your abilities. If you try blocking, you're just going to get shoved into the domain anyways. Because you're basically getting enveloped into a domain. And if you literally dodge into a domain, well, the same thing's gonna happen. It's just like you're getting enveloped into the domain, you just like pushed yourself into it. Congratulations. But at the very least, there should be some way to cancel the activation for some domains. Like let's say, I don't know, you're playing Thunder, and in order to like activate the domain, you're constantly locked onto your opponent charging a supercharged shot. Like, I don't know, you have your distance, you got all the prep work done, now all you need is distance from your opponent, and you know, they're playing a bit passively, so this is your chance. So you start charging up the domain, it like locks onto the opponent, and it'll hit them. And the only way it can be cancelled is if your opponent hits you. It has a really long wind-up, but once the wind-up strikes, there's no way of stopping it. Or let's say Fire has a hypothetical domain that just like creates a lava pool that drags your opponent into the domain. You know, this is again just a hypothetical, where instead of like hitting you to cancel the domain, they instead just have to get out of the area, and then the domain just gets canceled because it didn't catch anyone. So in other words, if the domain doesn't catch someone, and the domain is canceled in some sort of way, shape, or form, you get punished for it. Alright? Again, the punish should be like the same for the most part. Like let's say, oh, if you fail like a domain, you can't move for a little bit because you wasted so much energy trying to pull that domain off. Right? This is just conceptual. Right? I have no idea what the actual downside should be, but this is just like the best I can come up with. Rule number 3. There's only 2 more, okay? There's this one and one more. But rule number 3. Domains should be allowed to get entered or broken in some sort of way. Yep, you can enter domains. Basically, if there's a domain up, there should be some way to enter it. And if it's impossible to enter the domain, then there should be some way to break the domain. And if the domain is possible, there should be some way to at least enter the domain. Now, the actual entering, breaking, etc. of the domains can vary, because there should be some outward physical appearance of the domain. Like, let's say, I don't know, Gale has like an orb of air that surrounds you. That just looks like it copied what Glitchtail did with Hate, alright? It just looks like that, but wind. Alright? That just exists. It's just wind, you can force yourself inside of it, but it's going to be pretty hard to break because how do you break wind? Meanwhile, ice, in order to actually infiltrate the domain, you're going to have to like break open a part of it and then infiltrate the domain. However, it's going to be impossible to get out until the domain either ends or the domain frickin' collapses. Either by time or someone breaking the outside, alright? And when I say people don't escape, I like to imagine at least most, if not every single domain should like be its own separate area, kind of like how guild bases are handled, where you're teleported to an area while inside a domain, but once a domain breaks, the domain no longer exists, you're teleported back into where the world you were, everyone's back into the position they were, that whole thing. Once a domain's gone, you're just back where you were, right? Just giving yourself the illusion that you're inside a domain of varying sizes, even though outside could be smaller, maybe bigger. And finally, something I think could be interesting if we want to follow this idea of domains, which is the only rule that's really inspired by JJK, right? Like, domains can be anything, and really you can call this, like, concept really anything, but I'm just calling it domains just because, like, this idea of domains in Deepwoken were kind of inspired by JJK, and this idea is also inspired by JJK. Domain clashes. Basically, I see 2 ways of domain clashes happening. Number 1, a mixed domain where you have to fight your opponent and whoever's dealing the most damage, domain wins, right? That's it. Or alternatively, play a minigame where you and your opponent basically have to do like some sort of minigame, maybe similar to fishing, maybe similar to whatever. The domains clash, whoever wins that minigame, domain fully expands, alright? Now, how does a domain clash work? Well, it could be as simple as, oh, if you're using a domain expansion and your opponent also starts prepping their domain, like you both happen to have like the requirements, yada yada yada, everything's all set up, you begin the domain clash, right? Like you're both trying to open your domain, you're both trying to start the domain, it's creating like a ripple effect around the area, like nobody's able to get close to either of you two as you're both trying to pull each other into a domain, creating such like huge ripples, shocks of energy, basically just like making sure nobody can like cheese you or like jump you while you're opening your domain. I mean, maybe you can get jumped while trying to open your domain and it immediately makes your opponent win, but I feel like that would just be cheap if you're getting ganked, you know? Or maybe have it so you're pulling multiple people in, and every single person who's like in the sidelines about to get pulled into either one of your domains, kind of just like get shocked, like basically being stunned and like paralyzed from all the energy and song that's being flung around. Alright, and I know this is like a little side rule, like this is actually the last rule I wanted to make, just because like I forgot to say this in the beginning. I also want like each attunement's domain to change based on the path you're following. So basically, this is the mastery of your ability, so therefore the path you're following should alter the effects of what your domain does. Alright? Anyways, with all the rules out of the way, God, it took such a long time. Thank you if you're still here. Thank you if you're still interested in what I have to say, because good God, this is clearly going to be a long-ass video. Let's just get started with the actual domain attunement concepts, and I'm just going to start off with what I'm most confident in and what I'm least confident in. Alright, just so like we know how I'm going to order this. God, I hope this video isn't 50 minutes long. Alright, so first up we have is Frost Straw. Now, I'm not going to give names to any of these, but I will just like say how I believe the domain should work and the upsides and downsides that every person has who enters. Anyways, so the actual activation for this mantra should be quite simple. Basically, it should be similar to Iceberg. However, instead of like summoning an iceberg around you, the particle effects of like the actual iceberg appear below you, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, basically showing the area of effect that, well, this domain will reach you. So basically, the bigger the area around you is, the more likely you're about to hit someone, basically if they're in the area. Anyways, this charges up for a bit, and then you slam the ground, and ice just like envelops the area. If it hits someone, whether an NPC if you're testing it, or a player, doesn't matter, if it hits someone, it envelops them. Basically, you're transported into something I like to call the Frost Cavern. Now, what is the effects of the Frost Cavern? Now, the outside appearance, I just want to say, because I think this would be cool, the outside appearance is like that igloo from Avatar. Basically, you can see everyone like frozen in there, but they're like faded out a little. It's kind of hard to see them because it's like a little foggy inside the ice. But they're there, but you can't see them moving. Basically, it's just like that thing Vision Shaper did, where like everyone was crouching. It's just like a body double. Now, these can't be hit, and hitting them won't like deal damage to anyone inside, but it's just like it's a visual thing. It's a visual detail, and breaking a hole into the side of this will allow you to infiltrate, well, the domain. Simple as that. Anyways, back to the actual effect of the domain. I don't know, you can tell I'm very autistic and I'm just rambling here and there about every idea that comes to my mind, and these videos are not scripted. I feel like that's obvious at this point. But the actual effect of the domain, alright? Actual effect. So inside the domain, it should be really foggy. Clouds of ice like fill up the area, basically making harder for your opponent to see. And also name tags are disabled just for like the effect, because I think that'd be fun. Unless they're an ally. If they're an ally, they can see your name tag basically. Anyways, that's going to be one of the downsides. It makes it harder for your opponent to see, but the actual person using Frost Straw can see pretty well in this fog. Basically, they have eyes on your opponent, and, well, your opponent doesn't have eyes on you. So, if you're using ice, this is probably good for like sneaking around and like building up frost on your opponent, slowing them down, obscuring their vision, and giving them a hypothermia debuff. Now the hypothermia debuff could just be, well, slow. Basically just getting slower, maybe slower and slower the more mantras that hit them. Maybe even having more stats effects, like the colder they get, the more damage the mantras actually do to them. I don't know, that's just a funny idea I thought of. Anyways, apart from that, the actual buffs you get can be one of two things. This can really This can really depend basically on what you want out of this, well, domain. You could have it so, A, you get like an icy body around you, basically letting you take less damage. So even if your opponent does see you, you're going to be covered in ice and it's going to be harder for them to actually hit you. Now, the actual defense you gain could vary, but it's just like, again, this is purely conceptual. You can actually come up with different concepts. I just would love to hear what you guys think. Meanwhile, the second idea is just, again, ice mantras deal more damage following that first concept. Again, this can vary here and there. We can like discuss all day about what the concept should be. Either way, I'm just throwing the idea out there. Meanwhile, glass path. Now, this one is actually different in the sense that the outside is still the same. Nothing changes there, the activation is still the same. However, the actual inside is vastly different. Where instead of being this foggy, icy cave area, instead it's just like more crystalline buildings or just like decoration inside. Basically more elegance to it, but also having a sense of like a dangerous aura to it. I'm not sure how to describe it. Anyways, the perks here are different. So while ice is focused more on slowing and, gaining advantage from your opponent being slow, freezing them to the ground, all of that happens with ice. Meanwhile, with Glass Dancer, we're going to be focusing more on that Glass Dancer path. Basically, the area is more like an ice rink. Basically, your opponent's going to slip and slide, and they're going to have less traction with like their stuff. They're going to have struggle moving, so they may stick more to one place more. Meanwhile, you're going to be able to zoom around basically like an ice skater, an ice dancer, whatever. You're going to be focusing more on dancing, moving around a lot more, and also your mantras build up more crystals and, deal more damage with their AoE. There's no real gimmick here, unlike with the other attunements I have ideas for, because the other ideas I have get crazy. Anyways, next up is an attunement I don't really play a lot with, so I don't really know how this concept would work, so this is where y'all come in telling me if this is a good idea or if it should be reworked. But this is also one of the attunements that has vastly different domains, so it's why I wanted to talk about it here. Gale Breath. So, the normal domain for Gale Breath. So basically, the activation for the domain is yet another AoE activation. You're not pulling your opponent in here, they just need to get out of your area. Basically, you start building up a wind charge in you. If an opponent hits you, it's not going to cancel, doesn't matter. There's going to be wind building up at your body, building up, getting more intense until you release it everywhere. If it hits your opponent, it suddenly envelops the area, and you activate... I don't know what the domain should be called. Anyways, the point of this domain is the outside area looks like, again, that hate ball. I'm just gonna follow that concept. Basically, it's gonna look like the glitch tail hate ball, but green and windy. Inside the domain, here's the effects. Suffocation's always going to proc, alright? Your suffocation is going to proc more likely, you don't even need the talents, it's just going to be stronger suffocation. Like the actual wind is making it harder to breathe around you. So you're not going to be able to cast your mantras as easily in here, and you need to be careful of the opponent's mantras, which means you need to respect how fast they can move with their wind mantras and their combo capability when they're near you. You need to be really careful around here. And second of all, the opponent gets buffs to their wind mantra. So all your wind mantras are buffed. Only yours. If the opponent is also using wind, they are not going to get buffed, only you are, because this is your wind. Wind that you can't even control anymore. Which is going to be the gimmick of this domain. Basically, the area around you, the ball that you are trapped in, is swirling, twisting out of control. And this is also going to be more high risk and reward for you, which means even you have to be careful about your movement here. Basically, your goal is to knock your opponent into the wall of your domain. However, the opponent can do the same to you, but the effect won't be as strong. Anyways. The entire point is if you knock your opponent into the wall of your domain, they get sucked into all the gale wind that's going on, and the domain will end early. They'll get flung around, swung into the domain, and then launched into a random area out. Now, let's say you're in the depths, right? I've decided a random area and not just like, oh, where the opponent's facing, that it'll be set to like a certain location, like to their left. Which means the opponent could just cheese you by just like having to their left look to like the void and then just chuck you in there, which is funny, but let's be real, that's not really that fun. So making it more random is kind of more fair, so the opponent doesn't get chucked off a cliff more often, more likely to just get chucked at a wall or just sometimes off a cliff instead of always off a cliff. Anyways, it flings you out, and as soon as you hit a surface, you take a mass amount of damage because you just got flung into a wall or flung into the ground, basically. You took a lot of damage. You probably have like some broken bones or something, because like that, you just got flung around at high speeds. Anyways, as for Spectre Path, this is where things actually get a little more interesting. So instead of like summoning this wind orb around you, it's actually going to change visually on the outside, where instead you're going to be building up wind and it's going to slowly form into a mist around you. And then the mist immediately spreads around you. And anyone who's caught in this mist gets sent to like the spectral graveyard. I actually thought of a name for this one. Alright, so the spectral graveyard, the actual gimmick of this one is, you know, number one, your opponent can turn invisible, blend into the fog. Basically, it's going to be like a foggy graveyard area, right? But here's the downside to that. Even if you're invisible, you're not going to be able to use your wind mantras or even hit. You have to actually get out of it in order to actively attack your opponent. Another thing, you cannot proc any sort of healing in here. You cannot use items, you can't use food, none of that. However, as I said, the domain is misty, so you would assume, oh, you could just walk out of this domain. Here's the deal. Only the person who activated the domain knows where the exit is. However, if they exit their domain, the timer of the actual domain is going to be cut to a fourth of its original time. Not half, not a quarter, a fourth. Because that was a problem with Visionary Realm, and we don't want to have that same problem here, where the opponent is just stuck in the domain and doesn't know what to do. You can only exit the domain from one area, and the only way you can find out where that exit is if someone walks into the misty area that's in the overworld. They'll know where the exit is, and they can lead you out. However, if you don't have any allies that can do this, you're gonna have a problem. Anyways, the actual Gale user, Spectre user, who summoned this domain is going to know where the exit is. So they'll be able to leave anytime they want, but that's not going to really benefit them that much, because the benefits come from them staying in here. So basically, they can pop into this Spectre form, right? Pop into this like Spectre form, they're completely invisible to the enemy. They blended in with the fog. They became a literal Spectre. But there's no real purpose for that until you actually start building up wind mantras on your opponent. So while your opponent's trying to like escape the domain, trying to escape this haunted Spectre graveyard, you're gonna sometimes pop out of your Spectre and maybe land a wind mantra too. Maybe focusing more on range and chipping down your opponent slowly rather than using heavy combo mantras. You can still use combo mantras for like your Spectre path because of how Spectre path works, but as for the domain, they're also going to start building a Spectre bar. Now this Spectre bar will build above them rather than on their HUD, so it's more obvious to them that, hey, something's going on. And as the Spectre bar builds up, the more Spectre, Gale, whatever they build up, the more it builds up, the more like the graves start releasing specters slowly, attacking the opponent. And instead of attacking once, you know, it'll attack like twice, going through the opponent and then charging back at them. This time maybe being able to be dodged, like if you dodge them, they like break into the ground and like disappear once more. So it's more like you're going to like attack your opponents a lot with Gale mantras, and once they have Spectre, you're going to a lot of Spectre bar, you're going to slip into your Spectre mode and then escape the actual domain, leaving your opponent trapped in the graveyard for a while until the domain eventually closes. There's no real big finisher like with the first one, but it's moreover just mental warfare with your opponent. And I will say one thing, if you're in Spectre mode, your opponent can hit you, and if they hit you out of it, if they hit you at all, they actually lose some of their Spectre bar. If they exit the domain, the Spectre bar ends. If there's nobody left in the domain instantly closes. Alright, I think this is more like an interesting thing, so that's why I thought of it. I don't know. If y'all have any better ideas, let me know. But, Jesus Christ, this video is actually getting long. Okay, so we're not going to talk about every single attunement like I thought. I might have to split this into two parts. So instead, we'll do this with one more attunement. Alright, on to the last concept for this video, because yes, it's only one attunement this time. Blood Rend. Now this is an activation I think should be cancelled. So, how this activation works is, there are some requirements needing to be met. I forgot to mention there should be requirements for the actual attunements for actually building up or launching the domain. Basically, it shouldn't just be, oh, if the mantra is available, you should just activate it. There should be some requirements, like for Gale, building up like a lot of Spectre or landing your Gale moves and like maybe having some prerequisites. I don't know, this is just something that can be talked about and something, hey, maybe I can talk about in the next video. But clearly, I'm running out of time, so I don't really have time to talk about all that. But point is, there needs to be some sort of like setup before the domain can actually start. And here, I actually thought of one. Alright? So blood rend. Number one, you need a decently sized puddle, alright? You need a decently sized puddle that you can stand in, alright? Number two, your opponent needs at least 70 or 80% blood poisoning. Maybe more, maybe less. This can be discussed based on like what y'all think is more balanced. Because I'm gonna be honest, these ideas are way crazy, way out there, and probably won't get ever added to Deepwoken, but it's just fun to talk about and I want to like discuss. Because I mean, hey, you never know if your ideas are not getting into the game unless you like talk about them. I don't know, this is just autism ramble. Anyways, getting off topic, Jesus Christ. You need a decently sized puddle, and your opponent needs a decent amount of blood poisoning. These can vary to what size is what balance. If the domain can be used, it'll hop off cooldown in your hotbar. Upon activation, it'll use up like maybe 30, 40, 50% of your blood. It uses up a lot of blood because the attack you're about to unleash, the domain you're about to create, is massive. And you're using a lot of blood to create it. But basically, you're charging up blood inside of you. And it's obvious you're charging up blood because it looks like you're putting your hands close to your chest, close to your heart, as if you're channeling all the blood to one location. Which is your opponent's cue to run up and attack you. Because if they are really far away, they're gonna get sucked into the domain. Anyways, they are charging up the blood, until finally you release basically the equivalent of Chaser's grab attack, except much bigger, like a wave of blood. It shoots forward, and then once it hits the opponent, immediately flings up and tries to come back to you. And then boom, you and your opponent are sucked into a massive puddle of blood. And the way people can enter this domain is by using moves ally to submerge. So theoretically, everyone could enter this domain if they have Beast Burrow, Shade Step, or the Blood Dive move. I don't remember what it's called. But anyways, the actual inside of the domain I think is interesting because it's taking place inside the blood puddle. So along the floor is going to be a lot of like infected blood. And all this blood is going to proc most of your talents that, you know, proc when your opponent's in a full blood. It shows how much blood and infected blood they have. Their blood poisoning's not going to lower, all of that jazz. However, based on how much or how little blood poisoning your opponent gets, this is going to affect the abilities somewhat. So if you want to go with the idea that it takes a low blood poisoning for your opponent to actually get pulled into the domain, or it's just like a low requirement, basically what happens next is your opponent very slowly, not like a quick thing, but very slowly gets ticked with blood poisoning, just like tick, tick, tick. Basically just like that. It's really slow and they like slowly build up blood poisoning. And it actually increases the effects and increases the effectiveness of blood rend talents and natural blood poisoning effects. It boosts that. And second of all, your blood poison abilities, blood rend abilities, all that get boosted here. And you're going to be stealing a lot more blood from your opponent. So instead of your blood rend dealing more damage, rather what's going to happen here is like its gimmick is you're going to be stealing a lot more blood from your opponent and possibly kill them from blood loss. Yep, that's it. The domain here is blood loss. And also all the other talents. I don't know. This is the most work in progress one I have. Anyways, I would talk about more domains, but literally this is half an hour long and I don't want to keep y'all here forever. So instead, I'll talk about more domains in the future since we already have all the rules established and like examples here. And I could even like elaborate and like create new rules in the future that allows us to like better explain domains. Maybe I'll also maybe make a script for it because all I have for a script is just, hey, here's what to talk about, here's ideas, go nuts. So yeah, apart from that, thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing the video, all of that. And I'll see you next time. Oh god, I'm gonna hate editing this video.